That's my favorite one. So we good? Sound you was able to check it? So, we have a seat, my brother. Thank you. Is it good? I like him. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, we thank Almighty God Allah for his coming in the person of Master Farah Muhammad. We thank him for his raising up the most humble and honorable Elijah Muhammad, who we would say is the exalted Christ. And we also thank him for both. We thank all of them for their preparation and leaving us one who, if it wasn't for them, I would not know the most honorable Elijah Muhammad. And that Master Farah Muhammad came, and that's the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And I greet you all with the greeting words of peace and paradise, as said in the Arabic language. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, sir.
So, brother, that's how we start off. For most of the people, they're familiar with this series. We've been doing it pretty much for everybody that comes into the city, maybe the last 2 or 3 years. And what kind of started it was, a lot really just has had me on this for some time. I have some emails where I was emailing different people, asking them to tell me stories about the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And the idea was to actually put it in a book. And Sister Claudette wrote her book, and we were at the dinner table with the minister in Houston. And he was talking about how, because he did the foreword to the book, he was talking about how he never really hears those stories about how we come into Islam. So Brother Robert, now Abdul Halim, started telling him his stories. And as I sat there, the idea came to mind when I returned back to the city that we would get believers. The idea, I wanted all of the believers, but some people didn't want to write their testimonies for whatever reason. We respect that. But we put a book together and we sent to the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan as a gift for one of his birth anniversaries, right? But the desire had always been to get with people to hear them tell their testimony, their personal testimony, but also where they can attest and testify about the minister. And Brother Jesse came, Brother Rashad, and we were actually doing it, like I was telling you today, it was actually from the roster. And when a brother came and he did his, and I guess what was ever on his heart, he felt like speaking. We was like, want to hear the testimony. So we said, after that, we're going to start doing an interview style. Then came with Brother Don Enoch. And since then, we just realized this interview style is pretty good. So now we have you, right? And I'm very thankful that you are here, my brother. And I think you've kind of gotten the spirit from myself, Jason, and Patrick, and just, we're still Muslims, but we like to we encourage everybody just to be their authentic self. And that's one of the things I admire about you. So we have you, and we're going to get right down to it. We're going to ask a few questions, and then we'll open up for questions for those who are here. So starting off, and we've been together for a good part of the day, and that was just hard for me not to ask any questions. I was like, I don't want to wait till I want to tell the first time I hear when everybody else here. Jason asked the main question. And I read one of your interviews with Brother Jesse, which was powerful. So for the audience here, can you just tell us just some background history? Where were you born, your upbringing, stuff like that before Islam?
Yes. Well, first of all, I want to thank you, the believers of Mosque 46. This is my first time in New Orleans, and I'm honored to be here. I'm absolutely honored to be here. I've had a wonderful time. I've always admired and loved this city for its cultural, musical, culinary, artistic impact that is admired and respected all over the world. And so I hope that my short visit this weekend will invite a longer visit, but I hope to take it as much as I can when I'm here. So as Brother asked, I was born in the city of Buffalo, which is on the other side of the country. New Orleans is the southernmost part. Buffalo is the northernmost part of the United States. In one of the Rust Belt cities, on one of the Great Lakes that I mentioned in the Supreme Wisdom Lessons, the Caveman Lakes, Lake Erie. And Buffalo is a Rust Belt city, a former industrial city when the steel industry was booming in cities like Detroit, Cleveland, Chicago, Buffalo, Milwaukee. When those industries left or began to fall, so did the cities fall. And so in Buffalo, if there were a ranking of the poorest city or the sickest city in terms of health, or the most segregated city, rank number 1 would be Chicago. Rank number 2, according to my research, is Milwaukee. Rank number 3 is Buffalo. Buffalo is the microcosm, the macrocosm of all the ills that our country faces. And so when it comes to health, the people in Buffalo are typically some of the sickest people in the country. The educational system, even though this is what they call post-segregation, Buffalo is still one of the most segregated cities in America, and it's seen in the education system where I teach and work with young people. It's seen in almost every aspect of the society. And so growing up in that, my parents, my mother, my father, wanted to give their children, I have 2 younger siblings, a younger brother and a younger sister, an outlet for not only creative expression, but an outlet for us to be able to use our gifts and skills in a way that could take us, maybe outside of the city of Buffalo, but outside of whatever our reality was growing up on the east side, which is the black community of Buffalo. My father is a retired firefighter. He was one of the first black firefighters in the city of Buffalo. My mother worked for Niagara Mohawk, which is the power company. And what's the power company here?
Energy.
Energy. Okay, so in Buffalo it's called now it's called National Grid. But just your hardworking, working class black family. But they saw to put a violin in my hands when I was 7 years of age. And like any parent giving their child a gift, the child may not understand the gift at that moment. I think initially I had a desire to want to experiment with the violin and classical music, as my younger brother played violin and my sister played piano. But it took some parental influence also to keep me and us focused on our instrument. And if I can go, I'm not sure if this is one of the questions, but I want to talk about my teacher and mentor, Mr. Louis Farrakhan, because he is an integral and an important part of my violin experience. Being in classical music, especially classical music, you rarely see our people performing at a proficient level in classical music, like you see us in jazz and of course, hip hop and R&B. But we've had a presence in classical music since its beginning. And just to give a little brief history lesson, at one of my schools yesterday, I shared with the students, we performed a piece by Beethoven, who was an African in Europe. But not only was he that, he became one of the greatest composers of classical music, was one of our brothers. I shared with Student Minister Willie at dinner tonight that in this country, the United States, the first orchestra in this country, like we have the New York Philharmonic and the Chicago Symphony, the first orchestra in this country actually was in this city of New Orleans in 1830. It was called the Negro Philharmonic Society. It was all black orchestra. Imagine going to the symphony and seeing 100 musicians, violins, cellos, flutes, percussion, all looking like us. That was the first orchestra in this country. But now today, we don't see many of our people performing classical instruments. And so growing up as a young black classical artist, I would perform in orchestras, I would go to festivals, I would go to competitions, and not see anyone like me. And even though that was discouraging, my parents kept me focused on my instrument, on my craft. And in my early teens, I recall that my father, who was a very wise, intelligent black man, would sit my younger brother and sister and I down on Thursday nights and watch the public access channel, and there would be this man that would preach. He would wear a bow tie. And I don't recall what he would teach at the time. I don't recall what he would teach. but I knew that he meant what he was teaching. And on one Thursday night, this same black man was playing the violin. And he was playing a piece called the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto. It was a piece I was learning at the time in high school. And, you know, the minister said, he described something called love at first sight. And he said, love at first sight is when you can envision something in your mind, you know, and you desire it, you long for it. And when you see it in reality, immediately he said, that's love at first sight. So when I saw the same black man that would preach playing the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto, it was love at first sight. And I began to listen a little closer to what he was actually preaching, and also what he was also playing, but what he was actually preaching. And I fell in love with not just the message in the music, but the message in the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad that he was articulating. And it was since that age, I was 16 at the time, until now that I've been a student of his teaching, of his message, of his music. And it's that teaching and message and music that is inspired in me and what we share in our community through Muhammad School of Music, which is we've just celebrated our 20th year of teaching young Black and Latino and children of all ethnicities classical music in the inner city of Buffalo, New York. And so to come back around to center, I'm just honored to be in your city, and I hope to be able to share something artistically this weekend while I'm here.
So in your playing, being introduced to a violin at that young age, how did it just help you developing as a teenager and even up until an adult?
Yes, that's an excellent question. Music and the arts, as the minister described music as a universal language. And when a child studies any artistic expression, it could be music, dance, visual art, the outlet of creativity is what gives us our voice. It helps us to find our voice, our definition. Allah is the creator of the heavens and the earth. So he's the first creator. And all of us live in the masterpiece of his creation. And so as we admire, Allah's creation and everything that he's put on the earth, from the single drop of rain to the trees, to the animal life, to the insects, to art that we haven't even discovered yet, different planets and solar systems, it gives us a glimpse of our own potential. And how do we express that potential but through artistic expression? So if it's poetry, if it's music, if it's dance, that's the God that's in us, that the vehicle is through our music, through our creation, through our art. And that's why children, if you notice, their first expressions, if it's singing, if it's dancing, if it's acting, if it's writing, that becomes one of the first vehicles that they use to express themselves. And so Muhammad School of Music and Downman School of Farrakhan has encouraged us to give our children this type of voice, so that no matter what field of endeavor we go into, and we can go into any field of endeavor. It could be the arts. I have students who graduated from my program who are doctors in medicine, and doctors in law, and doctors in, I was sharing with Brother Student Minister Willie that my first student in Buffalo 21 years ago is now completing her doctorate in global economics, which, I can't even begin to fathom what she knows. But the violin, I taught her violin from the age of 7. And so whatever discipline we go into, we take the creative discipline that comes with learning the instrument into that expression. And that's what we want to equip our children with. The minister said that he wouldn't be the man that he is today without the violin, without music as a fundamental part of his life, from starting at his age of 5 up until the artist that he is now in his latest CD box set, Let's Change the World.
Man, you also, you mentioned about one of your first students, but tell them about how one of your children was actually delivered by one of your students.
Yes. There's so many students that we've taught that have gone on, and I shared that we have 4 children. the youngest, who is now 9, as we were in the delivery room, I later found out that one of the attending physicians was a former student. And of course, in the delivery process, everybody is masked up and, on edge. And later on, one of the nurses told me that he said that you were his teacher a long time ago. And I was like, oh, you should have said something. But that's the beauty of teaching and being in education and cultivating minds, is that, the seeds that we plant, watching those seeds grow up and bear fruit and prosperity, and meeting students. I met a student a few months ago at the Department of Motor Vehicles, and I was waiting to be called in line, and a tall, black man with long dreadlocks and tattoos came up. He said, "Mr. Muhammad?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I don't know if you remember me, but you taught me when I was 7. And I said, "Wow." I said, I don't remember you, but tell me your name. I said, "You taught me at School 90. And he said, one thing you always used to say, Mr. Muhammad," he said, "you always used to say, perfect posture makes for a perfect performance." And he said, sometimes if I'm at work, if I'm sitting down, I'm slouching in my chair, I'll remember Mr. Muhammad used to say, perfect posture makes for a perfect performance. And I'll sit up in my chair.
Got everybody sitting there.
So, that's the gift of cultivating, and sharing what you know with those who do not know. It's just an outstanding, rewarding experience.
So you mentioned at the age of 16 is where you first heard the album Minister Louis Farrakhan. So the seed of interest in the teachings began there. So how did that transition into you? Just that process, that story,
yes, sir,
of coming and being a full registered member of the Nation of Islam.
That's a very good question. So at 16, I'm living in the home of my father, and my father practiced at the time Christianity. My father is very versatile in religion. He introduced us to Buddhism, which is mentioned in our lessons. He, of course, introduced us to Christianity. My father is also a student of the Hebrew teachings. He reads and writes Hebrew, and so he gave us a wide understanding so that we could appreciate the diversity of different religion, cultures, expressions of people who appreciate and love God. But at the time, Christianity was the religion of his home, and Islam was not. And so I kind of had to go undercover as a Muslim, and I would have in my room, underneath my bed in a box, I would have Message to the Black Man in my Holy Quran. And I would record the lectures of the Honorable Louis Farrakhan, and then listen to those lectures in the night when I could put my Sony Walkman on and listen to the Honorable Louis Farrakhan teach on the true meaning of Christmas, and the true history of Jesus, and who is God. And this went on from 16 until I went to college. I went to the city of Rochester, as I was sharing, the city of Rochester. But by that point, I had learned so much of Islam that when I went to the mosque, I went wearing a suit and bow tie. And when I signed in my name actually as Henri Muhammad. I didn't have an X. But I knew that Muhammad was my name. So at the end of the meeting,
Type of bells.
when the brother said, "Is anyone here to accept?" And he looked around, and I raised my hand. He said, "Well, brother, we see that you already have the teachings." And so, but I was like, "But I wanna sign the yellow card." And so I joined the FOI class, and I got my X on September 19th, 1994, as we were in the heat of campaigning for the Million Man March. And so as a college student, this is in my freshman year of college at the University of Rochester, we campaigned for the march. The brothers, as a college student, studied the violin, but on Monday nights I would go to FOI class, and we would go out into the community of Rochester, New York, and then travel to the city of Buffalo, which is my hometown, to campaign in the city of Buffalo. And the minister came to speak on his men's only meeting that July of 1994, where I heard him live. I was on post, but I heard him live a little bit for the first time. And then going to the march, I believe as a coordinator of something called the Nation of Islam Student Association, I think the city of Rochester sent 3 busloads of college students to the Million Man March, so that was kind of how I got started. And
so how did eventually your father had to know you would start your interest?
Eventually, yes, he did find out. And it was a little rocky at the time, you know, and sometimes the Quran admonishes us to lower the wing of humility for our parents. The Bible exhorts us to honor our mother and father. And so I never at any point disrespected my mother and my father, even though my spiritual views were different. I always respected my father, and today we have our mutual love and respect. He still continues to teach me, to feed me from the enormous wisdom that he has. And that's one thing about Downman Farrakhan, as a man who is universal. He can go into any religious house and preach, you know, if it's Christianity or if it's Judaism, or even as one who's familiar with Buddhism, I can hear the teachings of the Buddha in the Honorable Mr. Louis Farrakhan, because he's versatile in communicating what Downman Muhammad gave him, because Downman Muhammad's message is a universal message. And so I thank Allah for the upbringing that I have. My mother who's passed away, my father who, my father lives down south, he lives in Florida on a ranch, and I go down and I see him, he coaches me and we ride horses and do things. But Islam is in my heart, and I hope to take all that I've been given from him, my parents, from Louis Farrakhan, and then transfer and give it to our people for our upliftment. In conclusion on that question, Louis Farrakhan said that our culture is a reflection of the knowledge, wisdom, and understanding that we've been given. What is civilization? It's knowledge, wisdom, understanding, culture, and refinement. And so all the knowledge that we have, and the wisdom that we have, and the understanding, it turns into the culture that we produce. And our culture is our music, our dance, our art, our food, our style of dress, it's our mannerisms. So we don't have to say, we don't necessarily even have to articulate what we believe, but our culture will reflect that God has come to us and given us a supreme wisdom. That's how the world will know that God has touched this people and has visited this people by the display of our culture.
Okay. So you've had the opportunity to be with the minister and with the violin and talk. I know there's several times I want to hear about all of them. Tell me about like the first time you had that opportunity to meet the minister.
Yes. So the first time that I met the minister face to face was on one of his World Friendship Tours. And one thing about the minister is that we see him publicly on the stage or in an interview or at Savior's Day, and but in person, one-on-one, he is the minister as well, but he's also a loving father figure, and he's a counselor, he's a guide, he is generous. His generosity extends beyond what we even know about, the minister's generosity. And so he was on tour, and the last stop of his tour was in the city of Toronto, which is north of Buffalo. And so I went to Toronto to perform, and it was there that I performed for him for the first time on violin, and then I was able to greet him, and he invited us to dinner. And then on another occasion I performed for him, and then over the years of performing for him and meeting him, he introduced me to his violin teacher at the time, a man named Charles Veal, who's mentioned in the documentary. Yes, Mr. Veal. Mr. Veal was assisting the minister in his recording, his masterpiece recording. And the minister instructed me to visit with Mr. Veal, to have Mr. Veal training coach me. And when Mr. Veal passed away suddenly and untimely, the minister took me on as his student of violin. And from that time, I've been blessed and honored to visit with him in his home, one-on-one in his studio. It's often just him and I in the studio for hours as he coaches me on violin. And you know, the ministers stand among us. So as you see him, as he can teach a 4-hour Savior's Day lecture, he can teach 4. And when we practice, when we study together, it's 4, 5, 6, 7 hours straight. I mean, he's asking me, "Do you need a break, brother?" I said, "Yeah, brother, can I get some water, brother?" The same way you see him when he's able to teach, right, and his ability to articulate, and he's the same way in person. Right? And so he'll hear a note. He'll be able to pick a note out. "Brother, fix that. Brother, correct that. Let's go back. Let's do it again, brother." As a violinist, you know, the minister is 86. I think this year he'll be 87. But the way his fingers move, you would think he was 19, 20 years old. And some of the music that we play, I'm going to play the piece tomorrow night. I'll play the piece that he's coaching me on, the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto, which is one of, if not the most technically challenging and physically demanding violin concertos in all of the repertoire. But the minister's fingers at 85, 86 years old, flying through scales, and I mean, I don't know a violinist at that age that can do it, but he can do it. And then to overall, to cap that, to have the emotional, spiritual support of someone, a teacher like Downman Louis Farrakhan. And for any of us who study any kind of craft or art, we're always looking for that coach, for that trainer, right? Like the trainer of Muhammad Ali, who was it Dundee?
Yeah.
Right. To have like a coach that believes in you, that sees where you can go with your skill. All of us desire a teacher like that. Downman Louis Farrakhan is a teacher like that. To have a teacher that believes, that sees you going on further than where they are, he's that kind of teacher. When Mr. Veal passed away, as Mr. Veal was his teacher and then mine, it was a tragic loss for me. And in fact, the day that I learned that he passed away, I had gone to Chicago to meet him. And when I went to his residence, they told me at the front desk that he passed away. And I just broke down and cried. And I got in the car and I called Sister Amina, formerly Sister Kim, on the voicemail. I don't know if I got a word out. I was just, and the minister told me that he got my voicemail. And I was like, "Oh my gosh," you heard me babbling and crying and sobbing. But it was a tragic loss for me. And because Mr. Veal was a teacher that was preparing me to perform for the first time my violin concerto with the Buffalo Philharmonic Orchestra. But at the funeral of Mr. Veal in Los Angeles, I went, and I shared this story with somebody the other night. And at that funeral, I saw the minister performed on the program, and then afterwards, I thought I was just going to go back to the hotel and cry some more, right, and get on a plane and go back to Buffalo. The minister took me and we went to the hotel suite, and we literally played and practiced violin all night. And I wrote him later on and said, thanked him and said, "Brother Minister, you know, you raised me from the dead," because I was going to quit. And that, him taking me in under his wing like that, you know, and to help re-inspire me, reinvigorate the desire for me to want to continue on that path, that's the kind of teacher that the minister is. And I hope to be able to articulate that and share that with the world, so that they know that the Louis Farrakhan, we know him on the stage, but there's another side of him through his art that we want the world to know and be able to experience.
So I can imagine with those times where you're with the minister for 8 hours doing that. Like, what were some of those like if you can remember, if there were like wow moments or something that he said is like what, like we hear what he says on the stage, but now it's personal. There were things you may have asked him that just like wow.
I'm gonna think. I know, yes. The minister's versatility, and he's versatile in articulating every aspect of society. So you can hear him talk to, cultural artists. You can hear him talk to politicians. You can talk to our people. He can go into the prisons and talk to the brothers and sisters that are locked down. He's just, Allah has anointed him with that ability. I know one time we were at dinner, this was actually in Los Angeles, and this was after the passing of Mr. Veal, and there were a lot of artists around that had gone to dinner, and then he paused for a moment and he said, Brother Henri, he said, the violin is like the sacred cow of Jewish people. And the Jewish community, this is me talking now, in the Jewish community has produced some of the greatest violinists. Yasha Heifetz, who's the minister's inspiration, as he talks about in the DVD documentary, and Let's Change the World. But the Jewish community has produced many great classical violinists that as a violinist I've learned to admire. But I heard the minister say one time that as the Jews came out of the Holocaust of the 1940s, they used it was their art and their science and their education that they used to lift their people and inspire their people and bring them out of that horrific experience. So now when you think of their community as a violinist, you think of the greatness that they produced from their community. And they are great in many other areas. In almost every aspect of life, you find them, their influence. Well, this is me talking based on what he has shared with me in that moment, that it's the presence of Master Farad Muhammad and what he gave to the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad that the minister is teaching us that we have to use to as we lift our people out of our condition, then the world admires us, and then they want to know, where did you get that from, right? And so the great artists that we admire and amongst our people, I may share something about this tomorrow night, but I'll say a little bit now. But the minister referred to classical music as the music of enlightenment. And it was the period of enlightenment in the the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s. Europe was in the Dark Ages, and it was the Muslim blackamoors who went into Europe with civilization. They brought running water, they brought electricity, they brought science and medicine. They also brought the classical arts. That's how the violin got into Europe. The violin is an African instrument. It's ours. And we took it into Europe, and then Stradivarius made his own version of it. But it was the presence of Islam that brought Europe into into enlightenment. Well, in America, the presence of God in person brings about an entirely new age of enlightenment. And so the Harlem Renaissance and all of the artistic movements that we saw coming out of the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, the Savior was in America in the 20s before he announced himself in 1930. But the Renaissance of America can be tied to the presence of God in person. This is an entirely new age of enlightenment that we're living in. And so how do you know that enlightenment is present? If God is not present, well, the people reflect that enlightenment. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to reflect the presence of God through our art, our music, our dance, our theater, which is spoken word, poetry, and acting. And all these aspects, I mentioned earlier, our culinary aspect. So one of the first things that the Savior taught us was how to eat to live. That's where you start. Automatically choosing a different diet, saying you don't eat pork anymore, when people automatically know, where did you get that from? Right? We got it from God. How do you live says, from God in person, right? That's where we got it from. So those are some of just a little bit of the things I hear in the minister. We'll touch on one-on-one or in a lecture, and then we take it and we expound upon it and run with it.
Thank you. One of the things that stood out to me about you when I was reading an interview, you talked about how hearing the minister teach from the scripture about when Jesus says, "As you have done to the least of these, so have you done unto me." And you said when you heard that, the idea was planted in your mind to begin to go and take your members, children in your school, and even sometimes yourself, and you will go and perform in senior living facilities, whatever, like you in prisons, whatever. Right? Tomorrow we've been blessed to be able to set something up in addition to what takes place that night. So talk about that experience, like how you heard the minister and then what you did.
Yes. As the scripture that you mentioned, it's in the I don't know the gospel, but Jesus is with his disciples, and they're saying, Master, when were you sick and we didn't minister, or we didn't take care of you? When were you hungry? We didn't feed you. And Jesus said, well, inasmuch, I'm going to say it in regular words, but inasmuch as you haven't done it to the least brother or sister in the street, it's like you haven't done it for me. So Jesus was telling his followers in that scripture that, it's not enough just to show love and appreciation for me, but show love and appreciation for your brother and sister. Right? And so Muhammad School of Music, we frequently go into nursing homes and schools. I share with Brother Student Minister, I teach in a school during the day, and then in the evening I teach at Muhammad School of Music, and then on the weekends I perform, and we perform in nursing homes, and we went to a correctional facility to perform for the brothers who were locked down. But that's our ministry, and in the growth and expansion of the nation. The 9 ministries is not just one ministry from the rostrum, but the Savior said that there's a big field for us to go practice our ministry in, right? And so through music, through the art and culture, we take the music into schools, into any venue that will have us. Churches, I think the music school is performed at almost not quite every church in every corner. But most of the major black churches in the city of Buffalo, we developed a relationship with, we performed and we fellowship with. And the churches receive us. They may not necessarily receive Islam yet, but the violin takes us and gets us in the door. And when we open up their hearts with the gift of music and expression and artistic expression, then we can bring them in. Of course, Muhammad School of Music is not just comprised of Muslim students, but it's students of every background coming to see and hear, what we've been given articulated through the violin. I have a picture of the minister in my case. I'll show you tomorrow night if I play something that over the case, right? But for many of them, aside from me, they may not see, another black man playing the violin, but that black man in the case is the black man talking.
You mentioned about, if you could just share the story about when you had the idea about going into a prison and all that.
Yes. So we received an invitation to go perform for a festival in one of the prisons. So the brother student minister of our city at the time, Brother Abdul Halim Muhammad, was in the prison ministry in upstate New York, and he invited us, and there was some hesitation because some of the parents, I guess they heard, they were told that we shouldn't take the children into a prison facility, and sometimes it's, we may hear different things, and sometimes there's some urban legends. But I decided to go directly to our minister, Louis Farrakhan, because I wanted to know. And the minister, he encouraged, supported us. He told us to take the children in and let the brothers see the brilliance of our young people. And that's exactly what we did. We went into the prison, we performed. The brothers loved it. I mean, they came over, they shook our hand, they wanted to eat and sit with us. We sat down together side by side. After we performed, we ate. They wanted to tell us stories about their family, their children. And that's the gift of music, that it can take us into any door and open up a heart that might seem the hardest of hearts, but deep inside, that's what the music does. That's what the minister's message does. I was sharing with someone the other night, one of the, there's so many beautiful stories of Downman as far as time that we each know that we can share. One story that I heard him tell was that he was invited into a prison once, as he goes into prisons frequently to teach. And he wanted to visit the brothers on death row. And the prison guards said, well, no, minister, we can't let you go in there. Those are, in so many words, those are the hardened criminals and whatnot. The minister said, no, I want to go. And when he went in, the brothers came out and he asked them to sit in a circle. And as they sat together, amongst some of them that the society would call the worst of society, the minister began to teach them. And within minutes, as he said, you could see the change in their hearts, in their expression, right? And then they began to articulate back to him of, what is in them that they may not have ever been able to express. He said one brother wrote a poem that he wanted to read, right? And so, when you have the right heart and the right message and the right tool to convey that message, if it's the word as the minister does or the violin, then we can get in with that word and that heart and that tool. We can get into unlock any lock. That's the lessons talk about. The rusty lock, the 17 million keys. We have the keys. We have to just go and unlock those hearts.
You talked about in an interview with on Brother Jesse's blog how the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan in one of the coaching sessions was talking about how our creativity is also formed or developed out of our difficulty.
Yes, sir.
I forgot exactly how I left my notes.
He told me personally several times, he said it to me as a reminder. He said to let the adversity in your life serve your creativity. And as we were studying, he was teaching me on the Beethoven Violin Concerto, which he performed at Savior's Day in Los Angeles in 2002. And Beethoven, as I shared earlier tonight, was the greatest composer of classical music, greater than Mozart and greater than Tchaikovsky. He also was of African descent. He was a black man. And he also was the composer who lost his hearing. He went deaf. And that handicap of deafness for a musical artist is a tragic loss. It's like a career-ending injury in football, right? In fact, Beethoven wrote, I've studied Beethoven, his life, his music. He wrote that the one faculty that should be the greatest in someone like me has turned out to be my downfall. And Beethoven went into a depression and was going to commit suicide. And he went to a retreat place called Heiligenstadt, which means holy place. And he went to Heiligenstadt. He wrote what's called his last, it's called the Heiligenstadt Testament. It was his last will and testament before he was going to take his life. But it was there at Heiligenstadt that Allah intervened in his affairs, and he touched Beethoven and gave him the ability to be able to write music in deafness. And so after Heiligenstadt, Beethoven, he didn't take his life, but the music that he wrote after leaving that place was some of the most profound classical music that had ever been written. His music was so challenging that the musicians couldn't play it. And Beethoven would say, well, this music is for a later age. Beethoven was writing music for the piano that they didn't even have enough keys on the keyboard to play, so they had to expand the length, put more keys on either side so that the musicians could play it. When he wrote his final work, his masterpiece, not his final work, but near the end of his life, his Ninth Symphony, the symphony was the orchestra had to be expanded. They had to bring on more musical instruments to play in the orchestra. It's for orchestra chorus. The piece is over an hour long. It had been the longest symphony ever written by a man that didn't hear a note. How do you do that? It's amazing. How do you write? I mean, he wrote it on the score, but how do you write as a violinist? I'm going to play, and I need to be able to hear if I'm playing the right notes. How do you compose in deafness and then write music that is 50 and 100 years ahead of its time? I mean, Allah had to have anointed the brother. And so the minister said that it was the adversity of deafness that led Beethoven to do what was miraculous. It's the adversity of black people in America that has enabled us to produce what when they say Black History Month inventions, every invention is produced out of the adversity of that experience. So in a humorous way, I like to say that it was a black man that invented the golf tee. Well, what prompted him to invent? Who was holding the tee before he invented the golf tee? Obviously, somebody must have lost some fingers to say, you know what, I'm going to make something so I don't have to hold this golf tee for these dudes, right? So a black man invented the golf tee. I mean, it's just as simple as that. But every technology that we invent, that we create, is out of the adversity. So let the adversity in your life serve your creativity. And so on one final note, as we talked about going into nursing homes, a few years ago, a couple of years ago, I released my CD, which is on the table there. And as I was going through a very challenging period in my life, I was inspired by Allah. I was guided to go on a literal tour of nearly all the nursing facilities in Western New York, in my area. And so within a span of 3 months, I visited almost all of them, sometimes playing for no honorarium at all, just to go and share and minister. And each time I would go and perform and share in fellowship with the seniors, for those who may not be able to come out to the Symphony Hall and hear us play, I was filled, I was inspired, I was healed, right? And so the act of giving and sharing and teaching, it's twofold. As they receive and are inspired and healed, so am I. And you'll find that when you go out and minister, that's what the ministry is, it's serving. And when you go out and share and give and attempt to heal, then you're healed, right? That's what empowers the minister, enables him to be able to be on the post for over 60 years. As he gives, Allah gives back to him. As he heals, Allah heals him. And he's the example for each of us to go out and follow.
Man, you've been in the Nation of Islam for how long now?
Since registered since '94, so I don't know.
I got registered in '94 as well. So just in the message to the black man, Most High Muhammad encourages believers to hold on to the handle of Islam.
Yes.
And you have to hold on to something. That means that sometimes it can be a struggle to hold on.
Yes. Yeah.
Just in Islam and work the path to become what we got it. We have our ups and our downs.
Yes, sir.
So what advice can you give to believers who are here today, watching it when we put it online, just in regards to that can help us to hold on to this handle of Islam through our ups and downs?
Yes, that's an excellent question. And the first thing that comes to mind is the minister said to me, he said to Brother Henri, he said, place your hand firmly in Allah's hand. Right? And I play that over in my mind frequently. But I think of how the Christians say, and church people say, that I have a personal relationship with my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. It's a personal relationship with Allah that gives us the strength. It's the personal relationship with the teachings. I wasn't blessed to meet the Honorable Elijah Muhammad face to face, but through his words and his teaching and what he gave to us, I'm acquainted with him. And of course, the minister, I'm honored to know him, but I'm also honored to be able to study his words, to hear him speak, to grow from the messages that he gave us, that he's given us, and continues to give us. And as he's encouraged all of us to develop our own one-on-one personal connection with Allah. When I was in college, Brother Jabril said, did he come to Rochester? He may have come to Rochester and said that every day, he said, you should look in the mirror and say to yourself, Master Farhan Muhammad chose me. Mm-hmm. So that person in the mirror that you're looking at, me, that God came and chose me. So no matter what I might be going through, I might be feeling the rejection, the pain, the disappointment, I have to remember that God came for me, and that there's a reason why He came for me and for you and for us. That we're here to contribute something, that He needs us to contribute something, and we have to be prepared to for positions awaiting us, as our lesson said, right? And so we talked about Dr. Aline, who is another mentor and coach for me. Dr. Aline has saved my life. And there was a time when I was very ill, actually near death. And it was Dr. Aline and his ability to heal, and then the discipline that I have through my violin, to be disciplined on my program, that literally saved my life, right? And when I was healthy or getting healthy, Dr. Aline said, we had dinner, and he said, now that you're healthy, now you have to understand, I forgot the word that he used, but I'm going to say a different word. He said, now that you're healthy, now you have to understand the meaning for why you're healthy. Right? Meaning that there's something for you to do. Right? But you can't do it if you're sick. You can't do it if you're ignorant to what you're supposed to do. But when you're healthy, when you know what you're supposed to do, then you're prepared to fulfill your mission. Right? And that's, of course, the importance of how to eat to live. Because if you're too sick to do your mission, then then you squander that opportunity. Master Fard Muhammad, as we're taught, will live, to 500. He could live as long as he desires, but 400 or 500 years. His mission is that long. How long is your mission? Maybe your mission might be 200 years, right? Or your mission might be 100 years. You have to be healthy enough to fulfill your mission, whatever that mission is. And then, Dr. Lim said, and then go on to something else. I may not play the violin forever. I might play the violin for another 100 years, and then I might do something else. I plan on being, I play jazz, I play classical, I'm never a rapper. That might be down the line.
You already got Jay-Z in your fleet.
I know, I do.
Not Nas, but so that is that. Man, so what we'll do now, we'll open up for questions from the believers. You all have any questions? Please give our brother a round of applause. So, Michelle, do we have Sister Nzinga?
So, I love your testimonies.
All praise to Allah. That's my wife. Yes.
I know you said your father introduced you on Thursdays to the minister. So after that, did you say anything about someone else introducing you or inviting you to the mosque? Or did you just go?
I just went. No one invited me to the mosque. I think the teachings, the power of the teachings, and the seeds that were planted, as I said, when I went to the mosque, the first time they thought I was registered, they didn't even ask me to join. I said, I got to the yellow card, and I remember the brother opened the door up and asked me, did I have a travel letter? I didn't know what a travel letter was. A travel letter, right? But we never, we don't know the seeds that we're planting in school, at work, amongst our other family members. But Islam, and in particularly the FOI, the fruit of Islam, the fruit carries the seed of the tree. And in the fruit, when we eat the flesh of the fruit, we gain nourishment, but the seed is also present. And every seed, every fruit has multiple, some fruits just have one big seed, like avocado. Some fruits have multiple seeds, like oranges and tomatoes. Some fruits have the seed on the outside, like strawberries, and the little itty bitty seeds. But every fruit has a seed. And as the fruit, all of us, brothers and sisters, as the fruit of the tree of Islam that we've been given, we're out there planting seeds that come back and they grow, and then, 10 and 20 years from now, we're going to see the benefit of our fruit, of the seeds that we planted. And so that's why I'm here. My father planted the seed, even though he didn't really want me to join the nation, as I shared earlier. But what it was, I learned at the time, is that as a young black person growing up, as I shared in classical music, mostly around other white people and Asian people, and not even really Latino students. In the orchestras I played, and I would be the only black or Latino member. My father knew that the Honorable Farrakhan and the nation was teaching black people in a way that had us lifted up. And so he wanted to balance me being in a white, amongst white society with the confidence of knowing that God came to us. And so wherever I go, and even still today, I play an orchestra where I am the only black person, right? But I can stand up with confidence and perform with, what's the word? Not with confidence, but with ability. Because I know that God came to our people. He came to all people, but he came after us specifically to put us, as the lesson says, to sit us on top of civilization. And that's exactly what I'm trying to reflect in my ministry, and that's what we're trying to reflect in our own individual expressions of Islam.
We're coming, Sister Nzinga, Brother Charles, and Sister Michelle.
My husband and I, we both have a deep appreciation for music.
Yes.
So when we had children, we said we wanted them to eventually take music lessons.
Yes.
So both of our children that live with us, 16 and 7, both of them are musicians. They attend a music program, a wonderful music program at the Ellis Marcellus Center.
Yes.
Who's well known here in the city.
Yes, yes.
My son, he's just starting out, he's 7.
Okay.
He plays the violin.
Okay.
Not the violin, the trumpet.
Okay.
My daughter, who's 16, she started from 11 and was gung-ho in the beginning, and now at 16, she's starting to kind of fade out a little bit. So what advice could you give me and my husband to help them to kind of reinvigorate and re-inspire them for their love for music?
Yes, that's an excellent question. And I talk about this I have some of my books back there that I released at the same time as the CD. And in the book, I talk about my eldest daughter, who at the time was 14. She's now 18. She's 18. She'll be 19 next month. Wow. And she started the violin when she was a year and a half. So she was this big. In fact, her first violin is a 32nd size. It's about the size of my hand. It's real wood, real strings, plays real notes, but it's a little baby violin. And as she grew up, she began to show an inclination to dance. And now she is a pre-professional ballerina with the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater in New York City. But the violin, we gave all of our children, we have 4 children, we gave them the violin. And in the book, I talk about that, we, as parents, we all should, the minister said this to me directly, he said that as parents, we should want something for our children. Especially at the young age, we should give them a direction, as we did with the violin. But as parents, we don't necessarily have to be beholden to the vision that we have for our children. Because we don't know where direction they will go, but the skills that they gain from their art are universally transferable to any field of endeavor. As I mentioned, my daughter is a ballerina. My son, who is 15, is also an outstanding violinist, but he's also a second-degree black belt in Taekwondo. And he's also a visual artist. My 2 younger daughters are, I'm supposed to know this, right? 11 and 9. And they're both violinists and cellists, right? They also sing classical music. And they're also writers and visual artists. And I don't know, that's the beauty of children, as I said, of planting the seed. You don't know where they're going to go, but when you give them the skills and the technologies when they're young, then again, it can go and it can be transferable, and we give them the teachings and the righteousness of Islam. I forgot where I heard this from, but they quoted the minister saying that if we teach our children to be righteous, then no matter what they go into, they'll be successful. And so that's our aim as parents.
Make sure you all pick up the book. Brother Charles. Brother Lawrence, you have any questions? Brother Charles.
I'm listening, brother.
Well,
And Good conversation, bro. Good teaching. But the question is, what artist would you recommend a person who's not really interested in classical music? I never really listened to it. What artist would you recommend for them to listen to? Because there are studies that they say if you listen to classical music, it improves your intelligence. I was just wondering, because I grew up on soul music. I was in the band, we had a concert band that wasn't alive. But my band teacher always said that classical music was really black people music.
It is.
Long before this other stuff.
Yes, sir.
I was just curious, what artists would you recommend?
Yes, sir. That's an excellent question. Classical music is like, it has various genres, but all music does. There's various genres in hip hop. So maybe the genre that, Brother Student Ministry, Willie and I may, grew up on would be Public Enemy and, KRS-One, and the genre that my children listen to are J. Cole and Kendrick Lamar, right? But as I was listening to your question, my mind is immediately drawn to the minister's masterpiece creation. Let's change what, can I for a second? So in the box set, the minister, as a man of universal, ability and articulation, has every genre of music in the box set. And so there's classical music, there's R&B, there's jazz, there's reggae, there's hip hop, gospel. And so the minister has shown me and shown us how to take, how to be universal. If you don't have it, I would encourage everyone to, as Beethoven's signature masterpiece was his Ninth Symphony, which we played it at my school yesterday. The Ode to Joy, which is probably the most famous, recognizable piece of classical music. That's Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, right? I believe this is the minister's masterpiece creation that will live on forever. And I think that introducing, young people, all people, everyone has something in this box set. If you appreciate jazz, there's jazz, and if you appreciate hip hop, there's Snoop Dogg and Rick Ross is in here. If you appreciate classical music, that's in here. And I believe this is God's gift through the ministry that He's given to all of us, that He's given to the world. And so I would encourage all of us to start with this, because it's truly a masterpiece. Mr. Veal, as I talked about, and he's in, if you read through the booklet here, I would go to visit Mr. Veal, we would get in the car, and he would play from the tracks from the ministry. See, this is 10, 12 years ago, right? Mr. Veal would play tracks. He'd listen to this, Henri, and he would play the track, right? And then he would call me and say, we're going to the studio with Stevie Wonder today. Or we're going to the studio with Stephanie Mills today. I'm trying to find Mr. Veal's picture. Here's Mr. Veal. This is Mr. Veal here. And I thank Allah for the minister giving Mr. Veal to me. For the brief period of time that we were together, just an outstanding teacher. And when I arrived in New Orleans, Brother Jason told me about his wife's gumbo. And I thought about Mr. Veal, because whenever I would send Mr. Veal paying for my lessons on Western Union, the password would be gumbo.
Jason.
I would go to Wired and would say, do you want to put a pass question? I would say yes. He said, what's your favorite food? And I would say gumbo. I've never had gumbo. Inshallah, Brother Jason's going to work it out for me. I'm going to try some Mr. Veal gumbo. Yes, sir.
So you talked a little bit, you talked about your children. So I had the pleasure of seeing you and your oldest daughter perform. Yes. So could you talk more about your family life, your wife? Is she a musician, and do you all perform as a family together?
Yes, that's an excellent question. So my wife is not a trained musician, but we founded the Muhammad School of Music, and in 1999, this is the music school's 21st year. And she was an instructor at the school. She suffered a stroke a year and a half ago. Has not been able to return to the school teaching activities as of yet. All four of our children were introduced to the violin. They perform. We do perform together as a family, and then we perform together in the music school orchestra, the ensembles that we take out to go and perform. My daughter, as a dancer, we perform together, as you shared, that you've seen us performing. But as they say, the family that prays together stays together. The family that plays together stays together. And my father was also a musician. He was an amateur musician, but he was the first to unite my younger brother and sister and I in performing together. And so, as a family, we were the church house band. We performed at weddings and family barbecues and family reunions. And my father played guitar. Still plays guitar. My brother played the drums, and my sister played the keyboards. And I would toggle back and forth between violin and saxophone. And sometimes we would play till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. The neighbors would call the police, literally. They would knock on our door, ask us to turn the music down. But that's where I learned and I gained the inspiration to be able to not just teach, but to perform, to share, to go out and perform and give the gift, through my family experience. And I think whatever, if we're musicians or not, the family bonding experience comes in us as parents giving to our children what brought us joy. And so the joy for me in my childhood was performing with my family. And so in turn, I give that joy and share that joy with the other students of the school, my own children, the students of the music school, and some of them, whatever their joy is, their happiness, whatever our happiness is, that's all we have to do is give that to our children, right? And those become some of the most memorable moments, of my childhood, of my children's childhood. Hopefully they'll grow up to be able to say that they loved, when we would hang out and play or go out and play, or, they become teachers. Or I noticed that my son, when my wife had the stroke, my son and my eldest daughter would come to teach with me. And I learned watching my son, watching him teach, I found out he's an extraordinary teacher, right? He's really, not just in necessarily teaching the violin, but in being able to communicate. And so as the children's mother is recovering now, she's a Canadian citizen, so she's actually recovering in the city of Toronto, which is her hometown. And my children are there with her. But the students that my son taught, they always want to know, when is Mr. Akbar coming back? My son's name is Akbar. My son's name is Akbar Khan. They want to know, when is Mr. Akbar coming back? It's like they don't want me, they want him, right? So, that's the beauty of the family experience. There's nothing more important with God than the family, as the minister has said. He said, there's nothing more important with God than the family.
I
was wondering, do you ever accompany or compliment like rhythm and blues or rock? I was thinking about Barry White and his orchestra.
Yeah.
And he brought his mainstream, and as well as I think the thing is Phil Spector when he put his orchestra behind Tina Turner.
Yes.
Do you do that?
I had the honor of performing with the great Stevie Wonder on his Songs in the Key of Life tour. Did that tour come here? I'm pretty sure it had.
Yes.
And when he stopped in Buffalo, they hired an orchestra. And the brilliance of Stevie Wonder, the Songs in the Key of Life album, in the dedications, there's a dedication to the Honorable Louis Farrakhan. Wow. At the time, this is in 1976, and in the history of the nation, we know that the Honorable Downman had departed, and Imam W.D. Muhammad had assumed leadership, and he gave out names, and he named the minister Abdul Halim Farrakhan at the time. So in the album credits of Songs in the Key of Life, he gives a credit to Abdul Halim Farrakhan. Wow. And you can find that in the credits. And in the tracks of the album, you can hear the minister Stevie Wonder are very close. So you can hear the teachings in some of the tracks on that album. So Stevie Wonder, when he went on the tour a few years ago, Stevie Wonder, as some, there's an orchestration of certain songs on the album. We did Pastime Paradise, Village Ghetto Land, orchestration on that one. A few other songs, I think of the set list that we had. But what happens in classical music is that, as I shared earlier, you rarely see our people in classical music. Most orchestras in America, even though I mentioned at the beginning of our talk that the first orchestra was all black, today there's less than 1% statistically. There's less than 1% of black classical musicians performing in major orchestras. And in the city of Buffalo, there are no black classical musicians in the orchestra in Buffalo. In the 75-year history of the Buffalo Philharmonic Orchestra, there's not a single, they've never had a single black or Latino member of that orchestra. Wow. I've been blessed to perform with them as a concert soloist and a guest conductor, but they never had, so and most orchestras are like that. So when Stevie Wonder went on his tour, he put in his rider for the orchestra has to have at least one black classical musician, right? And so most of the cities that he went to, if you notice, in the orchestra, there was always at least one. That was because Stevie Wonder requested that. And when he came to Buffalo, they were scrambling around trying to find somebody. And one person said, "Do you know Henri Muhammad?" And I was blessed to meet Brother Stevie. I told him, shared with him that the minister was my mentor. And, Stevie Wonder is one of the greatest artists of all time. And if you study his music, the message in his music, the divinity of his music, artists like Stevie Wonder and Aretha Franklin are artists who have never had to degrade themselves to produce their art. Stevie Wonder doesn't need to use, degrading lyrics or message or dance or wardrobe to sell their albums. They stand the weight of their message and the articulation of their skill speaks for itself. And so it was a tremendous honor to be with Stevie Wonder, and there's been a few other artists I've been blessed to perform with. But the violin is the most universal instrument of all the instruments. So on violin, tomorrow night I'll play classical, but I'll also do some jazz. And
second line.
I haven't done second line, but student minister has me back. I might get out there and hit
you have a uniqueness about yourself, which is good, and just like the youngsters say, swag. You know what I'm saying? I've seen some of your different videos, like your hair. You know what I'm saying? Which is good, which I like that. How have you been able to be your unique self within the Nation of Islam?
That's right.
Because sometimes we like to keep each other in the box. This is the way your Islam should be. So how have you been able to do that? And two-part question. And has the Honorable Minister Louis Farr kind of given you any advice regarding that?
Well, I'll say first about the minister. He hasn't necessarily given me any advice, but the last time we were together, he sat in a chair just like this. He sat in that chair and I sat in this chair. And this is on one of our breaks after playing. And he said, "How do they treat you, Brother Henri?" He didn't specify that, so I don't know who he was necessarily talking about. And I kind of, like a child, I kind of laughed. I said, and he said, "How do they treat you in your brilliance?" And I hung my head because then that's when it hit me, and I didn't say anything. And he closed his eyes and he said, "Thank you for not getting tired." Right. So a man that works for 60 years, has to have the love in his heart for his teacher, as he has taught us, for his teacher. regardless to anyone else, you know, when you're focused and like laser beam on your teacher and the mission, his mission, you know, nothing gets in your way. You know, people come, go, nothing that they've done to him has pulled him off of his post. You know, he said, and all he needs is Allah and his teacher, the two that he said is back him. That's all he needs. And so I think each of us have to have our conviction the same way, so that no matter what comes to us, for us, in front of us, behind us, as Shaitan does on the front, on the behind, on the right, on the left, we're focused on our mission. And so I don't know how, you know, my 20, whatever, how many years this is, 24 years now? I've lost track, right? I don't even count anymore. But I just thank Allah that I'm here, right? And that I have him, that I have the community of believers that are with him and with us. I have my family. I thank Allah that I believe that there is no God but Allah, who came in the person of Master Prophet Muhammad, and that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is our Savior, our Christ. I thank Allah that I'm able to say that with the conviction in my heart, and that I will continue to be able to say, I thank Allah that I'm able to represent him in my own way. You know, as we talked about the ministries, I don't have, and I share with the student minister Willie that I've been able to serve in the ministry. I've been in the secretary department, right? I'll share with Brother Jason, I've been a paper captain, and I was like a lieutenant at one time. There were times that I would come to the mosque in college on a Friday, and I would do the search, I would do the study circle, I would collect the charity, and I would lock the door up at the end, right? Right, but I thank Allah for all of that, so that I can be here today and still say that I believe in Almighty God alone. And I think that's what keeps me going.
He's like me. Jason asked him his age. He was like,
I know.
I'm gonna get caught up in all those numbers.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, have you ever considered the ministry class?
Yeah.
You answered my question.
Yes.
So, you know, I heard a brother say he went to the hotel room. This is a minister in Chattanooga, and he said he went to the minister's hotel room, and the minister was sitting somewhat like himself, and he said he reached out to touch his hand, and he said, you know, he had such a soft touch to him, and he was not this brute,
right.
But yet he was, so he said, I looked and said, man, is this dude gay? No, this is what he said, right. He said, but at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, whatever it was, he said, when they said, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, he said, this big old man comes and walks that stage. And so I saw that when you started talking, you got out of that, you weren't doing that, and you raised up. I said, oh, okay, so I see. Yeah, yes, sir. I saw that ministry class thing.
Yeah, the ministry has taught me to love the Bible, the scriptures, the Holy Quran, the teachings of the Almighty Muhammad. I'm in love with those teachings because I know they're our salvation. And when I look at my people and I see and I work with my people in school every day, the children I work with, it's my conviction that their salvation is in this teaching. And if I can find the best way to articulate the teaching, as Brother Student Minister Willie knows, that in a school setting we have to be very careful, you know, and skillful on how we introduce the teachings. I may not necessarily be able to teach, you know, from the Bible, the Holy Quran, from the teachings, but, you know, I can put, the messenger said, put Islam in the baby bottle. I can put it in a baby bottle and teach it to them so that one day they'll grow up to know that this teaching, they've been learning all their lives, you know. But I love the teachings, and anywhere I can articulate the teachings. If I'm in church and they ask me to play a piece, I can articulate the teachings in such a way that, you know, in church, I hope that they will have a greater understanding and appreciation. If they misunderstood the Honorable Farrakhan, hopefully they'll walk out maybe understanding him just a little better. Yes, that's what we all have to do in our own unique way.
Wow. Anybody have any other questions? I'm kicking myself because on our way here, he talked about how he was in the ministry. And I was like, man, if I would have asked you to teach the Sunday lecture, you'd have did it. He was like, yeah. I'm like, oh, yo, you know. So that's just more reason for us to invite him back and invite him back. Yes. If your daughter's not traveling with us, Elvin Haley, they're coming here.
They are, yes.
So we'll get the opportunity to invite you back. But thank you, man. Thank you for what you shared. This is recorded. Thank Brother Lawrence for making sure that's recorded. We're going to put out because I guarantee you from what you shared, there'll be believers who will see it and regular people who will see it. Because as we were talking about over dinner, people join the Nation of Islam with inclinations and skills and talents in the arts. You just don't lose it after you recite. So like when you sit in, like the minister said recently, that when the messenger gave that order about leaving music, that was really a test for him. Others were caught up, but it was really meant for him. We're not supposed to come to Islam and we give up a talent, a gift that God has given us. So when we come in, like we have to begin to have the avenues where believers can begin to express it. And I love what you shared, and even what the minister asked you in regards to how do they handle your brilliance. You know, because we have to grow. So our brother will be performing tomorrow at 7 p.m. If you don't have your tickets, you might need to get it. It's the hottest ticket in the city. You know, 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock, and please be here exactly at 7, because you know how I am. Yeah, I got that, bro. You gonna let me do my job? You see this dude right here?